Playing your tests right. My name is Debbie O'Brien, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft. And yes, I am all those things, speaker, teacher, YouTuber, open source contributor. And if you follow me on Twitter, Debs_O'Brien, you will see me literally cycling and running around the island of Mallorca in Spain, where I live. But yes, seriously, do sport. I do a lot of sport a day, and I really like to encourage developers to take time out of their day sitting in front of a computer all day and actually just get out there and do some sport. So yes, do sport. Okay, but we're here today to talk about Playwright testing. So for those of you who've never heard of Playwright, Playwright is reliable end-to-end testing for modern web apps. It runs your tests on any browser, on any platform, one API, tests run in full isolation and are really, really fast. So it means no more like running your test, going for coffee and coming back and the tests are still running. Powerful tooling, which we'll show you a little bit about today, and it's also multi-language. Now, I want to first of all talk to you a little bit about testing philosophy. So before we dive into the demo and show you the cool stuff, I want to take you back and just kind of show you a little bit about what you should be thinking of, especially if you're new to testing, where you should be looking at some tips and tricks to get you started. So here we go. Test user visible behavior. Now, this is really, really, really important. We want to test what the user sees and does, and especially in end-to-end testing, this is what the user is going to do. They're going to, click on a button and buy something. We want to test that whole process. So we don't want to test the implementation details. Now, what does that mean? It means don't test the names of functions. The user doesn't care. They don't see it. Not important. Don't test if something is an array. You've got TypeScript for that, so don't write a test for it. Don't test the CSS class of some element. Again, not important. You can use the CSS class if you want to assert and make sure that, the class of dark is on the page for dark mode. Totally fine. But you don't really want to test that it's actually called dark or darker or darkest. So yes, test user visible behavior. Make your tests as isolated as possible. Now, with Playwright, tests come, fully isolated out of the box. So basically, if you have a test here, they've got two tests on one page. And the first test, the example test, it basically has a context. And the context is an isolated browser context created for that specific test. And the page belongs to that context. Now, in the second test, underneath it, another test, has a different context and page, and that one in the second test is completely isolated from the first test. And that's how you should be writing your tests and making sure you're enforcing that isolation. Now, if you want things to be shared between tests, you can do before each and before all. And you can also do things like fixtures, etc. But overall, make sure everything is as isolated as possible. You can write fewer tests, but longer tests. So for example, you might have a really, really long process, and it's totally fine to test that long process. What happens if something fails, especially on forms and stuff? Well, you can use soft assertions. So you can use expect.soft, and then, that one, even if it fails, it's going to continue running that test. And then it'll get to the bottom and say test failed, but you'll note that it didn't just fail there. It might have also failed somewhere else as well, and you'll be able to work on that test easier. Avoid testing third-party dependencies. Now, this is really, really important because we're always hitting third-party APIs. We don't want to be testing the third-party APIs. For example, with a button that clicks and goes to GitHub, we don't need to test that GitHub works. GitHub's going to work. GitHub's amazing. But what we do want to do is make sure that that button is clickable, that it's not covered by a cookie banner or it's not hidden by some pop-up. So we want to make sure the button's clickable. We're going to intercept that route, and then we'll just make a dummy page there. As you can see, I've just a HTML body, H1 GitHub Playwright or whatever. And then it's going to go to that route and come back, and then you'll be able to easily see that that actually works. And here's an example of what that would look like. So just on my website, I've got a GitHub link in my header, and I'm going to click on play, and it's going to open up my website, and Playwright's going to click on that GitHub button. And instead of going to GitHub, it's actually intercepted. It's gone to that dummy page I've created with just that GitHub word. So yes, totally make sure you're not testing the third-party APIs, but intercepting those routes instead. So some best practices to write better tests with Playwright. First of all, do not throw your veggies away. Okay, use locators. So seriously, use locators. Locators are a way to find an element on a page. So when you want to find a specific element, such as a button, you use a locator. And we have testing library inspired locators. So you've got things like get by role, get by placeholder, get by label, get by test ID, etc. So you want to use those locators because they come with auto weighting and retriability. You never have to set timeouts in Playwright. Well, you shouldn't ever, unless your JavaScript is really bad and then you need to, right? But then you should fix your JavaScript. But yes, you have auto waiting already built in and retriability. So it's going to wait for that button to be ready. And it's going to retry it until it is. And then it's going to click it and it's all going to be happy days. Use chaining and filtering. So, make sure that your locators are really, really good. So if you have more than one, like add to cart button on a page, then you can use chaining and filtering. So you can get by the role, say list item, you can filter by the has text product to, and then you can get by the role button inside that product to product card with the name of add to cart, and then click on that specific button inside that specific product. Now, prefer user-facing attributes to Xpath or CSS selectors. This is really, really, really important. And I know a lot of people come from, other worlds where they have been using Xpath before or CSS selectors. But really, the reason why this is bad, at least in my opinion, is because you're changing often the CSS, you're changing often the DOM, and the user doesn't know about the CSS or the DOM structure. So why should they care, and why should you write your test based on that? Now, what happens if you change the CSS of your website? You update things. You move it to Tailwind, for example. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to have to rewrite every single test. Can you imagine how painful that would be? You don't want to do that. So make sure you're using user-facing attributes, get by role button, name, submit. Now, if that button changes, the test fails, you want to know about it, and that's a good thing. So yes, user-facing attributes, do not use Xpath or CSS unless for some reason, there is no other way. You can generate locators. So if you're kind of thinking like, yeah, but how do I know which get by role to use, etc.? You can totally learn accessibility, and I highly recommend you do. But if you don't worry. There is a way using the Playwright inspector. You can click on pick locator, then you hover over your browser page, and it's going to highlight that locator underneath, and it's going to show you which is the right one. And imagine if I was to write the test for this website. Looking with my eyes, I would come along here and I'd see a button and I would have said get by role button, but you can see that actually it's get by role link because the HTML under the hood is just an A tag and the styling has made it look like a button. So we're actually getting the better locators, the correct ones based on role by using the pick locator. So make sure you're doing that. You can also do it straight in VS Code using the VS Code extension. You can click on the sidebar, the testing sidebar, click on pick locator, hover over your browser page, and then it will add that once you click on one of them, it's going to add it to the pick locator box, and then you can copy it right into your test. Generate tests. So I highly recommend you generate tests. It's really easy to get started with Playwright, and also just saves you time from having to manually, do all that kind of writing. And also, as you saw with the pick locator, it's going to pick the right locators for you, so you don't have to think about, oh, is this a button? Is this a link? I'm not sure. Which role is it? So totally, you should use CodeGen to generate your tests. And let me show you a little demo of how CodeGen works. I love CodeGen. So I'm going to show you inside the VS Code extension. And we basically just come along here, click on the testing sidebar, and then we're going to click on record new. And it's opened up a browser window for me, right? But you can also see in VS Code, as I'm typing, it's like writing into that test. So we've already got a test file set up. We're going to that page. And now as we're clicking in this to do, I'm going to feed the cat, and you can see it's typing in there all those actions for me. So this makes it super quick to get started, right? Get by placeholder, what needs to be done, press enter. I didn't even have to think about, is it press, is it whatever? I can write another to do here. What are the plans? I'm going to do another one, do the shopping. And let's see, we can then click on the active ones. We can, highlight one, click this one is done, then filter by active, filter by all, filter by completed. And every one of my user actions that I'm doing is being recorded right in VS Code itself. And I've got my whole test here. So this is amazing, right? Because look how quickly it was for me to actually just get a test up and start. And I can run that test, right? And obviously, it's going to pass because it's just going through the user actions. So now I can come along and start adding my assertions and kind of say, right now I want to make sure that, active has 2 elements, completed has 1 element, etc., etc. So just once you've generated everything, then go through and add those assertions. Web first assertions. You need to use web first assertions. So basically, you can see the first one there, await expect page, .get by text, welcome to be visible. That's the good one. That's the one you want to be using. Do not use expect and then await page is visible to be true, for example, because that's not the Playwright assertions. So you want to use Playwright assertions because you're going to have less flaky tests. They're going to auto weighting. All that is kind of coming with it. Live debugging. So you can you have live debugging right in VS Code. If you're using VS Code, it's really cool because as you're actually typing in that locator name, you can see it being highlighted in the browser window. So it's really, really nice developer experience. Now, what happens if you need to debug on CI? Then you can use the trace viewer. So the trace viewer is a really, really cool tool and it records a trace of your tests. So when the tests run in CI, you can just go to artifacts, download that, and then open it up. And it's like a PWA. So this is kind of like an example of my website here with it in the trace viewer. And you've got the timeline, you've got the actions, the metadata, you've got then the action, the before and after. And this is a DOM snapshot that you can then basically open up Chrome DevTools and inspect. And you've got the call, the console, the network, and the source code of the test. So test across all browsers, especially on CI. So you can do this and it runs in headless on CI. So basically you could be working locally and just locally run in Chrome, and then later on CI test on Firefox Safari and make sure all those tests work. Here's a quick example of how to do it in VS Code. You select the default profile and then you'll click those and select them. And now when you run that test, it's going to open up that browser window and it's going to test them on each of the browser windows. And you can, visually see the difference between those three browsers being run. Keep your Playwright dependency up to date. This is really important. Every month we release a new release, and sometimes there's like a really, really big, cool feature that you do not want to miss out on. And sometimes it's just like some small things and you might say, oh, I don't really need that. But as we update every month, we also update the browsers. So the versions get updated every month, just like in the real world, how the browsers are released. So we keep those up to date as well. So you, by keeping Playwright up to date, are testing across the latest version of the browser. So you can find things before the actual next release of that browser is out if there was any kind of, some sort of issues with the browser. So keep your Playwright dependency up to date. Very easy, npm install -d playwright test at latest. Use parallelism and sharding. So Playwright comes with parallelism out of the box, so test run in parallel out of the box. And then if you wanted to do extra parallel inside your actual, describe block, you could add that in there. So it's going to even run parallel inside of the describe block. And as well, you can use sharding, npx playwright test shard 1 of 3. Run tests on CI. I already mentioned this. So make sure you're running your tests on CI. That means don't just run your tests locally on your computer. Run the tests on CI so that you can easily see what's happening. Once a pull request is made, someone else does something, breaks your test, you don't know that happening. So run your tests on CI. Some tips, things you might not know but should. Set up a local dev server. You can do this very easily right in the Playwright config. You can just uncomment those lines and it's right there. Set a base URL. So by using the base URL, you can then just use like a slash when you're going to the page, /about, /whatever, instead of actually writing that URL. Now, if that URL changes from like staging to production or whatever, you change it in one place in the config. Use emulation. So if you want to test dark mode, you can use like use color scheme dark. And there's like a lot of other stuff like, geolocation, etc. So yeah, emulate, viewports, all that kind of stuff. You can loop over arrays. That's kind of really cool. You can just get like a for loop and like I have topic of topics and then like have that test being rewritten for you just by going through that for loop. Watch your tests in UI mode. So this is really cool. This is really, really new. npx playwright test --UI. Let me show you the demo. So here we have our to-do app. And basically what we want to do is we want to come along here and we're going to press play on our test. Now this is how we'd normally run our test in VS Code, right? Which is perfect. So when we run that test, we didn't see anything, right? Which is kind of the issue we had at the start. So what we did now, we kind of come along and put in show browser. So now we're going to run and we're going to show our browser. And as we click our test now, it's going to open up a browser window so we can visually see what's going on. So there we go. Fantastic. But did we actually see what went on? It was so fast. It was like, I didn't really get, did that actually just do what I wanted to do? It looked like it did, but I don't trust it. I never trust my tests. So this is where we change things and we add in the UI mode. So we go to a new terminal and we put npx playwright test --UI. And then from here, it's going to basically open up the UI mode. So this is UI mode and it looks a little bit like that trace viewer that I showed you because it's kind of a mix of a trace viewer and like the VS Code sidebar. So I can just, put it into full screen mode and you can see here, I've got all my tests are in the sidebar, and I can kind of expand the describe block there and see each test inside that particular describe block. I can filter by specific tests. I can also filter by Chromium, by Firefox, by web, by passed, by failed, by skipped. And then what do I want to do? So I want to basically run my test. So very similar to VS Code, in that little triangle, we can click on the triangle of that specific test we want to run. I want to play that test. Now, as you play that test, you'll see that that went super fast, just like before. So you're like, well, that wasn't any different, right? Yes, but now we have this trace where we can go back and forward in time. You see what's happening there? I'm hovering, and as I'm hovering, things are changing, but I can go back, I can go forward. The source code is highlighted underneath. So I can click on the before action, the after action. You can see the difference. Feed the cat was after, before. What was the actual action, the source code before. I can see the actual locator, get by placeholder, get by test ID. So everything is really, really easy. If there was a console error, it would be there. If there were any network requests, they would be there. The whole log of my test, I can see the value, feed the cat. I can see the log, everything happening. I can click on metadata and see, what metadata for that particular action. And yeah, I can then pop it out. Right now, I've popped it out into a new browser window that I can inspect the DOM. I can close that then. I could have changed the CSS or messed around with that. Got a timeline at the top, so I can go highlight back and forward. And yes, you can also use the pick locator. But first, let's watch the tests, right? So to watch the test, you just click on this watch icon. You can watch all tests, just a single test, multiple tests. And then what you can do is you can click on this button, go straight into VS Code, and you can then basically change something. Let's just change something very, very simple here. And as soon as we write some code in here, what it's going to do, because it's watching it, it's going to run that test again. And it's super fast, right? And you can kind of, really see what's going on. So as you're working with your test and changing stuff, you can see here, I'm going to just do something very stupid, add in Debbie in there. It's going to run that test, and it's going to, completely fail, which is totally fine. But what you can do is if you're trying to debug something, you can use the pick locator button. And just like before, like I showed you, by clicking on the pick locator, you'll be able to inspect that DOM snapshot and find that action or find that locator, and then go and edit that test. So yeah, UI mode, very, very, very cool. So you should totally check that out. So Playwright is open source and free. Who's using Playwright? Look at our NPM downloads. It's like through the roof. GitHub stars. We just hit 50K the other day. So really, really happy with that. Make sure if you like Playwright, you give us a star. We love stars. We collect them. That's how we get paid. So, make sure you star us. No, I'm only messing. Yes, Playwright, open source and free, and by Microsoft. We have some amazing ambassadors, so check out the ambassadors page in the community tab on our playwright.dev website. Follow them for amazing content and the amazing stuff that our ambassadors are doing, or if you want them to speak about Playwright at your next conference, etc., or meetup group in your local area, give them a shout. We are on Discord. Community is very, very important to us. So please join us on Discord. There's a videos channel, there's an articles channel, so you'll be able to find content very easily. And there's also a help channel, and there's like thousands of community members willing to help you out. So my only question to you is, are you ready to Playwright? I hope you all are. I hope you really enjoyed this talk, and that I hope you really start to get testing your Angular applications and have fun while you're doing it. Thank you very much. Playwright.dev.